check, check, check.
Secretary Austin is an accomplice in genocide, and the public should be allowed in public hearing. Shame on Secretary Austin for supporting genocide.
Committee will come to order. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. Let me start by saying that we all here wish you a full and speedy recovery. We understand you are still recovering, and sitting for too long is not the best thing for your health. So in consultation with the ranking member, we've agreed to your request to limit your appearance today to 2 hours. To get to as many questions as possible, I ask unanimous consent to reduce the time for questions to 4 minutes. Without objection, so ordered. To members, if we can't get to you today, you please submit your questions for the record, and the Secretary has assured us he will get answers to those back in a timely fashion. Also, the Secretary will be back in about a month to testify again, so you'll have another opportunity at that time. Ms. Secretary, the reason we've asked you here today is not to discuss your health. We're here today to determine why the President was not immediately informed of your incapacitation. The timeline, as we understand it, is this. On the evening of January 1st, Secretary Austin was transported to the hospital via ambulance for complications stemming from a surgical procedure he had on December 22nd. On the afternoon of January 2nd, the Secretary's authorities were transferred to Deputy Secretary Hicks without her even being informed as to why. On January 4th, 3 days after the Secretary's hospitalization, Deputy Secretary Hicks and the President were first informed that Secretary Austin was in the hospital. On January 5th, Congress is informed of the Secretary's hospitalization. It's totally unacceptable that it took 3 days to inform the President of the United States that the Secretary of Defense was in the hospital and not in control of the Pentagon. Wars were raging in Ukraine and Israel. Our ships were under fire in the Red Sea, and our bases were bracing for attack in Syria and Iraq. But the Commander-in-Chief did not know that his Secretary of Defense was out of action. Even the Deputy Secretary, the person to whom your powers were transferred, didn't know that you were in the hospital. Our forces conducted a pre-authorized strike on Iranian-backed militia in Iraq during this period. Had something gone wrong with the strike, or worse, if there was an attack on the United States, precious time would have been wasted while the President sought in vain to find his Secretary of Defense. The chain of command doesn't work when the Commander-in-Chief doesn't know who to call. That's why we want to know who made the decision to withhold that information from the President. And although you publicly stated you are solely responsible, you've also informed this committee that it wasn't you who decided to withhold the information from the President. We were led to believe your 30-day interval internal review would shed light on that matter, but it includes no explanation of why the President and his staff were left in the dark. It makes no recommendations to improve communication with the White House, and unsurprisingly, it holds nobody accountable. We appreciate your desire to protect your subordinates, but it's important in democracy that public officials are held accountable when mistakes are made. This administration has gone to great lengths to avoid accountability whenever possible. But this is a matter of national security, and someone needs to be held accountable. Furthermore, I find it very concerning that the Secretary could be hospitalized for 3 days without anyone else in the administration even noticing. That suggests Secretary Austin's advice is not sought or heeded in the White House, even while military operations were ongoing in the Middle East. It also implies that the White House politicals, not seasoned defense professionals, are in the driver's seat on matters of national security, which is very disturbing. Finally, beyond the immediate need to inform the President, Congress also has a right to know of secretarial absence or transfer of authority. Ironically enough, none of this would have come to the attention if the White House hadn't demanded that the department come clean to Congress and the public. Ultimately, our goal today is to understand how and why this happened so we can ensure it never happens again. With that, I yield to my friend and colleague, the ranking member, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. And I will point out to members that in a little more than a month, the Secretary will be back, and he will be here for the full posture hearing, which will go on considerably longer than 2 hours. So that accessibility I do appreciate from the Department of Defense. This is an opportunity to address an important issue. And I will say I agree with much of what the chairman said. I think the lack of transparency and clear communication about what was going on with the DoD, certainly with the White House, but also with Congress and others, should not be repeated. We need clearer, more transparent information about what's going on at the Pentagon. I do want to disagree with just one thing the chairman said about how during the time period when you were in the hospital, the commander-in-chief didn't know who to call. He did. The transfer of power was made. It was made to the deputy secretary. And if anything had come up, that's the way the system works. When the Secretary of Defense is out of commission for any reason, Deputy Secretary assumes those responsibilities and roles, and that was made clear throughout the Pentagon and to the White House. Now, the reason behind it was not, and that's where I think the lack of transparency is problematic. I think we need to understand the importance of the role of the Secretary of Defense responding directly to the Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief should have the broad range of information about what's going on with the Pentagon. Even though, again, in this instance, there was no question who was in charge in that time, the transfer was done in accordance with the law and done appropriately. So I think it is appropriate that we have this hearing, that we have this discussion, that we hear directly from the Secretary. We have to work very closely with the Secretary as well as the Department to exercise our constitutional role of oversight of the Department of Defense. So to have those open lines of communication is crucial. I thank the Secretary for being here, being willing to explain that and take those questions. I do also want to emphasize that throughout this whole process, an incredibly complex threat environment. I think that's one thing on this committee absolutely everybody agrees to. There have been few times in our history when we've faced the set of challenges that we face right now. The war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, trying to make sure that it doesn't spread, the challenges that China continues to present, North Korea as well. Throughout that whole time, there is no allegation whatsoever that the Department of Defense was not completely on top of all of those situations. There was no instance where they were not doing their job to the utmost of their ability and in the defense of this country. In fact, I would point out that the coalition that Secretary Austin has been very responsible for helping to put together to stop Putin in Ukraine has been remarkably effective. And it's a testimony to Secretary Austin's leadership and the way the Department of Defense has been run on a day-in and day-out basis. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that it would be helpful if the United States House of Representatives would be willing to allow a vote on the much-needed aid for Ukraine and the Middle East and to pass the appropriations bills the Department of Defense could desperately use to better carry out that job. But there's no doubt that the coalition that has been built has been incredibly successful. 2 years ago, when the war started, everybody assumed that Ukraine would be done in a month. Here we are 2 years later, and they are a sovereign democratic nation still, in large part because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people, but also because of the coalition that has come together to help protect them that the Secretary has led. Even in the Middle East, a chaotic and difficult situation, we have stopped that war from spreading. The response to the attacks and the tragic death of 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan has, for the moment, blunted those attacks from the Shia militia. The Houthis are proving to be a much larger challenge in Yemen, but we have once again built a coalition to confront that challenge. So as we look at this question of what happened while the Secretary was in the hospital, and admittedly the lack of transparency that needs to be improved, let's not lose track of what the Department of Defense is doing right now to meet the national security challenges that we face. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Ms. Secretary, you recognize 5 minutes for any opening statement you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, good morning. I'm grateful to this committee for your continued support for the Department of Defense and our outstanding troops. The U.S. military is the most powerful fighting force in human history, and with your help, we're going to keep it that way. The Department is deeply focused now on meeting the pacing challenge from the People's Republic of China, on making the Middle East more secure after the October 7th terrorist assault on Israel, and on ensuring that Ukraine can continue to defend itself against Putin's war of aggression. So as always, we are focused on the defense of our nation. But I know that Congress has some legitimate concerns about some issues around my illness. So let me start by thanking all those who've offered me well wishes after my recent cancer treatment and hospital stay. I very much appreciate your kind words, and I received world-class medical care at Walter Reed. And I want to again publicly thank my doctors and the outstanding nursing staff. They expect me to be completely cured of my prostate cancer, which was caught early. And I continue to recover, and now I want to be very clear. There was never any lapse in authorities or in command and control. At all times, either I or the Deputy Secretary was in a position to conduct the duties of my office. But we did have a breakdown in notifications during my January stay at Walter Reed, and that is sharing my location and why I was there. And back in December, I should have promptly informed the President, my team in Congress, and the American people of my cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment. Again, we did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right. As you know, I've apologized, including directly to the President, and I take full responsibility. I'm also taking responsibility for some institutional changes to make sure that this cannot happen again. It's not enough for me to pledge to do better. The system must be postured better to make the appropriate notifications when authorities are transferred. And my staff must be ready to carry all of this out. But let me be clear, I never intended to keep my hospitalization from the White House or from anybody else. That's why we immediately instituted changes to the way that the authorities can be temporarily transferred to my deputy and to the way that notifications get made. That's also why we conducted a 30-day review of the entire process. Now, because the review deals with the continuity of operations, its drafters wrote it as classified. But of course, we've shared that review with all of you. The 30-day review made 8 recommendations to me, and I've directed that all 8 recommendations be implemented. We put 2 in place already, and we're moving out quickly on the other 6. So let me quickly summarize them for you. We've made clear that we expect full information sharing when a deputy or another designated official assumes the functions and duties as acting secretary. We've issued written guidelines for clear information sharing between my staff and the deputy secretary's staff if these scenarios arise. And we'll ensure that the department officials in the order of succession are familiar with and supported for the relevant processes. And we're moving quickly to develop a mandatory reporting protocol for personnel who support me or the Deputy Secretary in situations that might affect our ability to perform our duties and functions. Of course, we already have continuity of operations plans in place, and we'll continue to review and update those plans as appropriate. Now, even before the 30-day review, we already had made some changes. In the future, if the Deputy Secretary ever needs to temporarily assume the duties of my office, she and several White House offices will be immediately notified. That includes the White House Situation Room and the White House Chief of Staff. The key officials across the department will also be notified, including the Deputy Secretary, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the General Counsel. And the reason for that assumption of duties will be included in writing. As you saw these new procedures in action during my hospitalization earlier this month. And finally, the DoD Inspector General is still working on his own independent review, which we fully support. Now, before I take your questions, I want to again make one thing very clear. At no time during my treatment or recovery were there any gaps in authorities, and there were no risks to the department's command and control. And from the time that I resumed my duties on January 5th, I fully participated in national security decision-making on events in the Middle East and about military operations in self-defense to protect our troops and our facilities over there. Again, we're moving swiftly to put some helpful new procedures in place to prevent any lapses in notification. And I am confident that we will not experience the same issues in the future. So let me again thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for everything that this committee does to support to stand by the mission and the people of the Department of Defense, including their families. I know you understand this, but one of the best things that you can do right now to support them is to pass a full-year appropriation. In doing so, we'll ensure that our troops get paid, that our civilian employees can stay on the job, and that we can continue to procure and field the very best capabilities to defend our country. We need the flexibility and stability that full-year appropriations provide. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Smith, I appreciate your leadership on that score, and I stand ready to assist you in any way. And with that, I'll be glad to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Chairman now yields his question time to the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Military Personnel, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, help us get this straight. At what point during your hospital stay did you or your staff decide that the President should know about your hospitalization?
As I understand it, my Chief of Staff contacted the National Security Advisor and advised him that I'd been hospitalized on the 4th of January.
At what point during your stay was the 4th of January?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
How long into your stay was that?
Well, as we've pointed out, as has been pointed out earlier, I was admitted to the hospital
after you were
on the 1st of
hospitalized?
January. Right.
Okay. Yes or no, did you tell your staff not to inform the President, anyone on your staff?
I never told anyone not to inform the President, the White House, or anyone else about my hospitalization.
Okay, so the 30-day review summary lays a lot of blame at the feet of your staff. It seems that would appear, correct? For the breakdown in the process? You've told us that you are responsible, but the 30-day review seems to blame your staff.
Well, the 30-day review pointed out that that there were some missteps, but there was never any ill intent or an intent to obfuscate. So,
1 year ago, you told me in this hearing room you had no regrets about what happened in Afghanistan. Do you regret what happened here?
I've said that we didn't get this right, Congressman, and we put measures in place to ensure that the notification process is improved going forward.
Mr. Secretary, who will be held accountable?
The transfer of authority was
Who will be held accountable for this? This embarrassment?
Again, I take full responsibility, and we put measures in place to address the shortcomings.
Are you surprised the President didn't call for your resignation? I'm surprised, but are you surprised that he didn't call for your resignation?
The President has expressed full faith and confidence in me.
So you're not surprised that he didn't call for your resignation. Is it typical that the President would go 3 days without talking to his Secretary of Defense? Is that typical, or is that a regular posture? Do you usually go days without talking to the commander?
I mean, that can happen. It depends on whether or not the President's on travel. If I'm on travel, there are times when we do go days without direct communication.
So the big issue for me here is either the President is that aloof or you are irrelevant. Which one is it, Mr. Secretary? That the President would go 3 days without knowing that his Secretary of Defense is not on the job?
It's neither. The President is not aloof, and I participate in all of the
Let me ask you this. On January 2nd, while you were in the hospital, President Biden was vacationing in the Caribbean. Your deputy, who the President didn't even know had operational control, was on a beach in Puerto Rico. What kind of message does that send to our adversaries?
The key piece is that, number one, the deputy has the ability to, she has access to secure communications. She has the ability to participate in decision-making processes from wherever she is.
Mr. Secretary, our adversaries should fear us, and what you've done has embarrassed us. And let me sum this up by this. A leading Chinese propaganda outlet said that what happened to you exposed, quote, internal chaos. A leading Russian propaganda outlet said that your disappearance, quote, effectively compromised the
gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the chair now recognizes the ranking member.
First of all, let me say it is not remotely surprising to me that the Chinese and the Russians are not going to say anything positive about us. That doesn't come as a surprise to me. They seize on every opportunity to attack the United States. So I don't really take their word for what was going on. And a couple things to drill down on. One, it is fairly routine that the Secretary of Defense will be in places where you are not able to do everything you need to do, and that authority is transferred. I think a lot of people don't fully understand this. So can you walk us through, I mean, how often does it happen that you are in a place where you can't be as responsive as you need to be so that you pass the authority on to your Deputy Secretary?
Thanks. As pointed out in the 30-day review, there have been a number of times in the past where we transferred authorities because of my inability to have access to secure communications. And then once I had the ability to have access again to secure communications, that was transferred back. So that, and the number of times that that's happened is outlined in the 30-day review.
And was there, again, just to emphasize, was there any time during this process, in the first days of January when you were in the hospital, any time whatsoever when the Deputy Secretary wasn't in a position to fully carry out the responsibilities of the Secretary of Defense? Regardless of whether she was in Puerto Rico or Bermuda, Mexico or Mar-a-Lago or wherever, she was in a position to carry out all of the authorities that she had as the acting Secretary of Defense in that instance, correct?
She is legally and logistically positioned to assume the functions, and she was, you're right, in a position to be able to support the president as chief of staff, as he made decisions. So, commander in chief. So, she always has secure communications with her, just like me, and she has a situational awareness that's needed to be able to make effective recommendations to the president, and she, working with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and also the combatant commander, would propose options for the president in any situation.
Certainly, and one of the things I want to emphasize as this hearing goes forward is not to use this to the advantage of our adversaries, to use it as a partisan attack. There was nothing embarrassing about what happened here. There was nothing that makes us appear weak. The United States, as all of this was going on, as has been pointed out, was carrying out strikes against our adversary in order to protect our force. We were doing everything that we needed to do to meet the national security needs of this country. And if members of this committee incorrectly imply otherwise, they are merely giving aid and comfort to those adversaries that they claim to care about confronting. And I will also, one more time, emphasize that if we care about confronting our adversaries, rather than nitpicking the Secretary of Defense about his precise process in this situation, we should go ahead and pass the National Security Supplemental that the Senate has passed with 70 bipartisan votes to precisely meet those national security needs. Whatever Russia and Chinese propaganda machines may be cranking out about this situation, I assure you it pales in comparison to what they're cranking out about the fact that they think the United States is getting ready to abandon our ally in Ukraine. I would challenge any member on the other side of this aisle to claim that the Secretary of Defense not fully informing the President for 3 days is somehow more important than walking away from that obligation that we have made and that the whole world is watching us on. And with that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Mike Rogers. Secretary Austin, I first want to wish you a full and speedy recovery. And sadly, we're here today because of the failure to properly communicate Directive 3020.04 of the Department of Defense, which is critical information requirements through the chain of command to President Biden. As a grateful veteran myself, along with you, of the American Armed Forces, we both understand the crucial role of the chain of command to provide time-sensitive information to make the right decisions at the right time. When communications fails, there is an increased risk to mission success, but more importantly, increased risk to the servicemen and women. For this, to me, it's personal. As a 31-year Army veteran myself, having 4 sons who served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in Egypt, and currently my district director is deployed in Africa, I just take this personally with the South Carolina National Guard. that your service is just so critically important. And I appreciate having worked with you before your appointment, and we need your proven capabilities more than ever, as we are in a war we did not choose, of dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. It began February 24, 2022, with war criminal Putin invading Ukraine. On October 7, 2023, Iran puppet Hamas invaded Israel as the Chinese Communist Party threatens Taiwan. Sadly, Biden open borders for terrorists makes imminent more 9/11 attacks across on American families, and we need our state National Guards to be ready for duty. Every family actually should have a rally point when communications are cut with an attack. With the current global threats, today, there are attacks on American and our allies by Iran in the Middle East. Would the lack of proper communications degrade our ability to respond?
Again, I would emphasize that there was never a break in command and control. We transferred authorities in a timely fashion. What we didn't do well was a notification of senior leaders. So. And we put measures in place to fix it.
I deeply regret the response we had was ineffective by delaying a response, and it should have been an immediate response on launch sites, and it should have been very effective, and there should have been no notice. And so what was done really has put American families at greater risk. And as I conclude, I want to express our sympathy for the family of Alexei Navalny, who was assassinated by war criminal Putin. His widow, Yulia, is a hero for the oppressed people of Russia. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today and for your 40-plus years of service to the defense of our country. Again, just to sort of walk through one more time about the fact that there was no gap in terms of authorities and who was in control of the department. You went into critical care on January 2nd. Your staff then executed the law in terms of notifying the Deputy Secretary of Defense that she was in charge, and as a result, I mean, it was seamless. There was just never any moment where there was any absence of authority within the department. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And again, it actually was the Armed Services Committee back in 1962 that passed the law that, again, made this process happen, again, without any action, special action of the Secretary of Defense. It's different, actually, than the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, where if a president is going to go under anesthesia or is incapacitated, it actually says in Section 3 of the amendment that there has to be a voluntary surrender. Again, going back to President Reagan, he actually executed documents, filed it with the Congress, notifying that that was going to happen. That's not the way the law works for the Department of Defense. Again, it happens, again, if the Secretary is unable to perform duties, then that's it. The Deputy Secretary is in charge. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And then on January 8th, before even the 30-day review or any of the recommendations, you already moved to put into place a regulation that basically states that this now will be communicated in all instances to the President of the United States, so that the whatever confusion surrounding the lack of communication now has been now codified at the department to make sure it doesn't happen again. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir. And we had the opportunity to put those procedures in play when I went back to the hospital on February 11th, and it was there was timely notification in a seamless fashion.
So speaking of gaps, let's talk about the supplemental, because on February 13th, the United States Senate, actually by a vote of 77 to 21, it was more than the 70 votes that my friend Mr. Smith cited, overwhelmingly endorsed a package which will provide $60 billion to Ukraine, who is in a very dire state today. So 16 days later, we're here in this room. We're thankfully looks like we're gonna move forward on a FY24 final package soon. But the fact is that nothing has happened in the House to follow up what the Senate did. The Speaker explicitly said he will let the House work its will in terms of next steps with the supplemental package. I think everybody in this room knows if the bill was brought to the floor, we would get an overwhelming majority vote, pretty darn close to 2/3. I've talked to some Republicans who said it would be 300 votes. What's the risk? What's the risk of that gap in terms of our national security and helping our allies?
Well, we're seeing the risk play out on the battlefield each and every day as the Ukrainians fight valiantly to defend their sovereign territory. And I would remind everyone that with our support in providing security assistance, they've taken back half of the territory that Russia seized. But each and every day, we see the Russians continuing to push and make incremental gains, and that's very troubling. And without our support, the Ukrainians will be outgunned in terms of artillery, and they'll also be at risk because of lack of adequate air defense.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for having this hearing. Mr. Secretary, we do wish you a speedy and full recovery. I would concur with the points brought up by the chairman. I believe most members of this committee are bewildered at how these events could transpire. I am primarily concerned with the effect of your actions and the actions of your closest advisor on the confidence of the American people. At a time when overall trust in the government is declining, Americans must still believe that the government can protect them from the growing threats in this world. And one of the most serious threats is that of a missile attack from Russia, China, or North Korea. I chair the Strategic Forces Subcommittee and am charged by the chairman with the oversight of our entire nuclear arsenal, including the command and control of our nuclear forces. Every day, our service members who maintain and operate the weapons systems that employ these destructive weapons are ready to act within minutes of receiving a valid order from the President that flows down through you or your designated representative. Today, many on this dais will speak about disruptions in chains of command. I will say that the most dangerous change of command to break is that which communicates orders to our missile silos, ballistic missile submarines, and strategic bombers. We will only deter attacks on our homeland if our adversaries are assured that we are capable and willing to respond in kind massively if necessary. Not only is our homeland threatened by adversaries' ballistic missiles, but will increasingly be threatened by hypersonic missiles. So all of these attacks are a matter of minutes, not hours. We can't afford to have the continuity of our nuclear command and control fail for even a minute. My district of Colorado Springs is home to the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, which is the primary site of our Missile Warning Center. The Missile Warning Center maintains an unblinking eye that buys the President and the Secretary of Defense critical minutes. In a crisis, they initiate the conference between the National Military Command Center and those in the chain of command. So, Mr. Secretary, my question is, when did the National Military Command Center become aware of your hospitalization?
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was notified on, as I understand it, on the 2nd of January, and so the entire staff would have been notified at that time.
Was the Military Command Center informed that the Deputy Secretary of Defense had authority transferred to her?
When the transition takes place, there's a message that goes out to all of the key stakeholders, and so yes. Yeah.
And when was that message sent out?
2nd of January.
The 2nd of January. Was there we talked about seamless. It sounds like there was a gap between the 1st of January and the 2nd of January, or am I mistaken?
No, the 1st of January, while I was in the hospital, I could still, I still had the ability to access communications, and so I retained the responsibilities. On the 2nd of January, as I was admitted to critical care, it was determined that I would not have access. My communicators would not be able to provide timely access to communications for me, and so the decision was made to put the process that's in place in play. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you. Just a very quick summary of the law. If the President decides to launch nuclear weapons, the Secretary of Defense is not in the loop, which probably ought to come to our attention. Maybe we ought to make sure that the Secretary is in the loop, but by law he is not. With regard to the really important issues that face us, Mr. Secretary, we wish you well on your cancer treatment and your return to full health. You have an extraordinary service record. We note, if we care to understand, that it was your work, together with the President's, that assembled the support in Europe, NATO and the European Union, necessary for the Ukrainians to receive the support necessary to repel the Russian invasion. And you continue to do that. And I thank you for that extraordinary work. I will note that while we are spending our precious time, at least I think it's precious, on taking you and the administration to task, we are failing in our responsibility to fund the Department of Defense. We're now 5 months late in the appropriation process. It is the responsibility of the Congress to provide the appropriations, and we are not doing so. We're on our 4th or 5th continuing resolution. We are derelict. Not you, sir. It is the Congress of the United States and the leadership in this House that is failing to meet the national security needs of this nation. In the appropriation process, October, November, December, January, and February have passed, and we've not done our work. And we're spending our time here taking you to task. That's wrong. We're failing. Let me put it this way. The leadership in this House is failing. We have a supplemental appropriation, absolutely necessary for the defense of Ukraine. That has been languishing for months. The Senate has acted. This House and the leadership of this House has not acted. Is it that we are abandoning Ukraine? Is it that the Republicans in this House want to take responsibility for Ukraine's defeat? Apparently they do, because they are refusing to provide the necessary funding. Humanitarian aid, Israel, the replenishment of our arsenals, all are at risk because this House has refused to take action. Mr. Secretary, it is not you that are the problem. It's not what happened in your health emergency. That's the problem. You've laid out clearly that that has been resolved, that standard operating procedures were followed and will be even more so in the future. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for putting that in place. When will this committee actually stand up for the defense of this nation? When will my colleagues on the Republican side of this committee find the courage to get the job done? 5 months have passed. The dereliction of duty is not yours, sir. The dereliction of duty is right here on the dais. Mr. Secretary, 17 seconds. If you'd like to comment on the necessity of getting the job done, please do so.
Well, first of all, you heard me say in my opening comments, sir, that the full year appropriation is really important. Without that, we lose time and money.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we wish you, again, continued recovery from your surgery. I'd like to go through a series of questions just with your reflection and yes or no. Is it standard operating procedure for your security detail to notify in real time the National Military Command Center?
To my knowledge, my security detail does not notify the National Military Command Center of my work.
So it's not standard operating procedure for your security detail to notify the National Military Command Center?
That's right. So.
Okay. Well, if it's not standard operating procedure, and you said earlier that you have mechanisms built in to make sure that transference of power takes place from you to the deputy secretary, then how does your security detail then close the loop in getting information to the right place? And how is the decision made that the deputy secretary was then in charge?
Well, the decision is really about whether or not we've reached a point where, you know, I don't have the ability to continue to perform my duties because of lack of access to secure communications for a period of time. And that triggers the process that's established being followed, and that happened pretty quickly, and I think that they made the right decision.
So if it's not standard operating procedure then for your security detail to notify the National Military Command Center, which is the nexus for how information gets to the right place, so when issues of national security come up, the White House is informed because it's the National Military Command Center who's in charge of informing the White House. So that didn't take place according to you, and the standard procedure isn't there, and nobody in your office or your staff notified the White House, then how is it that people in critical decision-making positions then know when operational deficits take place, like you being in the intensive care unit that day and not being able to continue with your duties?
Again, by law, if I don't have the ability to execute my duties because of any reason, and in this case it was because of lack of access to secure communications, by law, the deputy assumes the roles and responsibilities.
Listen, I understand the law. The law is clear, but the law doesn't assure that there's continuity in operations and that people in critical positions know the current situation. So if something happens, the right decisions can take place in real time. The deputy secretary is in Puerto Rico. While she may have been advised or notified of a transference of responsibility, she stayed there, and it was a matter of if something really happened, was she in the right position to be able to do that? If the White House didn't know, the national security advisors didn't know, people in positions that would need to make decisions in case of, and we're glad that something didn't happen, but in case of, if that information isn't transferred, then there is indeed an issue of national security.
As I stated, there was never a lapse in authorities or command and control. And again, when the transfer is made, a message goes out to all the stakeholders that the transfer has been made, and so the communications specialists are positioned to route any incoming communications to the deputy that would have come to me. So,
is it not correct, though, that the president should have known, that the National Military Command Center should have known, that the loop should have been closed, and making sure that everybody knew? The standard operating procedure should be that your security detail notifies the National Military Command Center.
The Joint Staff Chairman did know on the 2nd of January, and
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you holding this hearing, and to you, Mr. Secretary, well wishes in your quick recovery. You've stated publicly that it could have been and it should have been handled better. That's clear. The 30-day review has been concluded. There was a number of recommendations which you had publicly agreed to implement, and you went further to talk about the Inspector General is also conducting that, and we look forward to it. And there should be a robust discussion. What there shouldn't be is partisan bickering and is trying to turn this into a political football. The idea of command and control of our military, of the defense of this nation, is of the highest priority to the men and women who serve here in Congress, those who wear the uniform, and certainly to every American who cares about that. I want to make sure that we fully understand, because apparently there is some doubt that there might have been a break in the command and control of our forces. Would you clearly state, for the record, was there ever at any time a break in that command and control?
There was never a lapse in authorities or command and control.
Because we understand that in the event that there was a national emergency, there was a kinetic conflict going on, there are a set of policies that take place in the event that there is ever a gap. If something were to happen to yourself or those below you, there's an immediate way of addressing that. And to go one beyond that, when it comes to nuclear command and control, there is very specific. And I have sat on that committee where we talked about, in the event that the president is not available, the vice president, there are clear and very specific steps that take place. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
So here we are. If this were to happen in a situation of somebody that you have control of that you didn't know, how would you have handled the situation?
If something like this happened to a subordinate of mine?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I would be concerned about that subordinate condition and welfare. And again, I would try to gain some understanding of what happened, and then I would ensure that we put measures in place that don't allow it to happen again, and that's exactly what we did here. And I would tell you that the president was foremost focused on my welfare, and then and ensuring that we had the right measures in place to streamline communications and to make sure that we were able to respond to anything in the future.
So as we are reviewing this, as we should, are there any other items that were not recommended to or lessons learned that you could share with us?
We're a learning organization, Congressman, and there may be things that we encounter in the future, or we consider in the future that need to be adjusted or changed. And as we encounter those things, we will adjust. But as a start, I think putting these 8 recommendations in place will help. We'd already done some things ahead of time to ensure that notification occurred in a very timely fashion. But if we learn more things going forward, we will adjust as needed.
Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I certainly wish you a speedy recovery. I want to focus on the December 22nd date. That's the one I have the most difficult time with. I understand the other one was an emergency procedure where you were taken by ambulance to the hospital, if I'm correct. Is that right? The January procedure was emergency.
The January event was an emergency. I took an ambulance to the hospital. That's right.
But the December 22nd date, when did you know that you were going to have surgery on December the 22nd?
Well, I scheduled that surgery about a week prior to the actual surgery. Okay. I could lock in a date, and I took leave in order to do that, and I made sure that we transferred authorities to the deputy that day, and I resumed my duties the following day.
Okay, so you took leave, but you knew that you were going to take leave a week before the 22nd, correct?
That's right.
That's whenever you scheduled the surgery for the 22nd, that would be when you knew. But she was not notified until the day of the procedure. Is that correct?
This was coordinated several days before, so I don't know the exact date when she was notified. But
okay, well, according to what we have, it appears that she wasn't notified. She was basically transferred the authority, but wasn't given the reason for the transfer of the authority. And I guess that's the thing I have the hardest time with, is not the emergency procedure, but it is knowing a week in advance that you're going to be under anesthesia, out for 48 hours, give or take some time there, and why she wasn't notified at that time that she needed to be prepared to receive the authorities at that stage. My understanding is that she was in Puerto Rico, not in continental U.S. at that time. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Okay.
22nd, she was in the States.
Okay, she was in continental. Okay. I just think when we know that you as the Secretary of Defense, there are 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, but there's one Secretary of Defense. When we know that you're not going to be capable of making the decisions, that the sooner the person who is going to be in the position knows what and why, I think the better we as a country are from making sure things have happened or happen the way they should. I respect you. I wish you a speedy recovery. That's my primary concern. The emergency procedures, I think we've lessons learned the hard way. Won't happen again, no matter who's in the seat. I want to say this with regard to some of the comments that have been made about Republicans and who we want to win in Ukraine. Let me assure you, we want the Ukrainians to win, and we want Putin to lose. But one of the key things that many of us have asked for, that have voted for the Ukrainians repeatedly, is the enforcement of the sanctions against Russia. And simply sending the Ukrainians weapons or money is not going to win the war against Russia and Putin. The sanctions have to be enforced. That is something that I have personally asked for in the package that's coming to the floor, and something that I think those of us who know the issue recognize it's more than just weapons and money that Ukraine has to have to win the war. With that, Mr. Secretary, I wish you the best and certainly keep you in our prayers.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Austin, for joining us today. Secretary Austin, I would like to thank you for your service and steadfast leadership, especially at this challenging time, and to express my wishes for you to have a full and speedy recovery. I recognize the deeply personal nature of your situation, and I'm also thankful for the committee for arranging this hearing. Mr. Secretary, I was deeply troubled when I learned the news that President Biden was not informed of your absence, let alone your hospitalization, multiple days after entering intensive care. While authorities surrounding the notification process for the Deputy Secretary of Defense to carry out new functions and duties is vague, it's clear that the chain of command is not. When I was an enlisted member of the Marine Corps, a corporal, I had to notify my superior if I could not report for duty. Just like there is accountability for the enlisted, I want to ensure that we are all held to the same standards, including at the highest level. So you can understand why the situation is very concerning to me and why I believe strongly that Congress should conduct robust oversight. In fact, as ranking member of the Intel and Special Operations Subcommittee, I understand the significant challenges that we face around the world and the reality that anything can happen at a moment's notice. We, in our senior department leadership, must always be prepared. It is clear to me that there was a breakdown in the department, and I appreciate the swift action that you took to conduct a 30-day review to examine the situation. I still believe that there are a number of important questions to ask and lessons to learn from this experience. Secretary Austin, your department just concluded a 30-day review to establish the facts and to inform process improvements. What are your primary lessons learned from this experience, and what steps are you taking to ensure that this breakdown in the chain of command never happens again?
Well, the key lessons were, first of all, as I've said, the transfer of authorities, I think we did what was done as it's supposed to be done and very quickly. What was not done right was the notification of key leaders. And so the lesson learned is that everyone in the environment and the process needs to have a clear understanding of what steps to follow for notification when things happen. And so the processes that we put in place ensure that that understanding is there, and that when something happens, that notification takes place in a very timely fashion.
And just to follow up, Secretary Austin, in terms of the transferring your position's authority, do you believe that there's room to grow in that area, just to make sure it's smoother and less opaque?
You know, I believe that there are things that we can do to make sure that the reason for the transfer of authority is crystal clear to everyone, and the steps that we've taken, the things that we put into place, ensure that there's written notification of why that transfer authority is taking place.
Thank you. Now yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the morning of January 4th, Mr. Secretary, you were in the critical care unit. The acting Secretary of Defense was vacationing in Puerto Rico, and President Biden was unaware that you were not in the chain of command. Now, as you know, I represent Fort Drum in the 10th Mountain Division, which you know well. Thank you for your service there in the North Country. But on this same date of January 4th, do you know how many 10th Mountain Division soldiers were deployed and are still deployed today in Iraq and Syria in support of Operation Inherent Resolve?
I know that they are deployed. I don't know what the number is.
It's just over 2,500. And on January 4th, at approximately 4 a.m. our time, the U.S. carried out a significant strike against a senior Iranian-backed leader in Iraq, correct?
That's correct.
And because President Biden did not know you were outside of the chain of command during this U.S. strike, if Iran or its proxies in Iraq or Syria had carried out a retaliatory strike against 10th Mountain Division soldiers, the president's chain of command would have and could have broken down, potentially delaying presidential orders to protect lives of American forces, constituents that I represent. Do you understand why this is unacceptable to the American people and to those military families?
Well, thanks. First of all, I would say that when we're attacked, we have the right to defend ourselves and respond immediately if it's a local attack. If a strike is warranted, then recommendations need to be provided to the president. Those recommendations come through from me, and after I've consulted with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and also the combatant commander. The deputy secretary would have done the same thing, and she has all of the capabilities and situational awareness to do that.
Except the president wasn't aware. The president of the United States was not aware that you were not in the chain of command. So God forbid there was a retaliatory strike.
Yeah,
that would have caused potential delays, and it is unacceptable. Let me ask you this. What disciplinary action would a junior service member face if he or she failed to properly notify their chain of command and failed to report for duty?
If a service member was in a hospital, I think the chain of command would be concerned about why they're in a hospital and make sure that they're doing the right things to take care of them and their families.
But don't you think it's their responsibility to notify their commanding officer?
I think
the answer is yes.
Possible, yes. In my case, I would expect that my organization would do the right things to notify senior leaders if I am the patient in the hospital. Yeah.
It is unacceptable, and you have admitted as such that there was a breakdown in communication with the President of the United States, and I highlight the exact time, 4 a.m. January 4th, when you consider 10th Mountain Division soldiers and the potential for a retaliatory attack. That breakdown is unacceptable, and you said something very important. You said there was never a break in command and control. But yet the President of the United States was not aware that you were outside of the chain of the command. So is the President not a part of this command and control? Don't you believe that the Commander-in-Chief and the SecDef, that is critical for command and control?
He is clearly at the top of the chain in terms of command and control. But what's important is that we provide him with credible options and that he can pursue to address any situation. And it would have happened in this case because
except he was unaware. So what's important is the President was unaware of this breakdown in command and control, and you were not there in terms of who he would hear from.
Time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I came to know prostate cancer as a child through my grandfather, and so at a very personal level, I hope for your speedy recovery, and I know that's a sentiment shared by everyone here today. And we are heartened to hear you are expected to be fully cured. Mr. Secretary, you and I were both trained as infantry officers, and I spent most of my time in the Marines, not as a general, but as a mere lieutenant. There are thousands of lieutenants serving under you in the military today. How would you advise a lieutenant to handle a situation like this with his or her command?
A situation in which they had one of their subordinates hospitalized,
or a lieutenant himself or herself were hospitalized.
Well, I would advise the lieutenant to make sure that they're doing everything to learn more about what happened, and also to ensure that we're taking care of that particular soldier. In terms of the failure to notify in a timely fashion, I would make sure that the lieutenant worked to put the right procedures and processes in place to ensure that his organization was able to inform him and inform his hire.
Mr. Secretary, I just returned from Japan and Taiwan, and I can't tell you how many leaders in Taipei and Tokyo asked us if we would fund Ukraine. They said that failing to fund Ukraine encourages Xi Jinping in China. Can you explain for the American people why standing up to Vladimir Putin and Russia alongside our European allies and funding Ukraine in their fight for democracy affects America's national security well beyond the borders of Ukraine itself?
Thanks. This really is about our security and the security of our allies and partners. And this really is about a rules-based international order. We don't want to live in a world where one country can redraw its neighbor's boundaries and illegitimately take over its sovereign territory. And so we know that if Putin is successful here, he will not stop. He will continue to take more aggressive action in the region. And other leaders around the world, other autocrats around the world will look at this and they'll be encouraged by the fact that, you know, this happened and we failed to support a democracy. And so I think it's a very dangerous path to go down if we don't support Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Austin, very pleased to hear of your good prognosis and hope that your recovery continues to be uneventful and goes well for you. Just a couple questions. At the time you were in the hospital, there were several strikes carried out against militias in Iraq. What was your role in carrying out these operations? Were you calling the shots, or was DepSec Hicks making those decisions?
Well, on the 4th, as we have said earlier, that strike, I delegated the authority to conduct the strike when the conditions were right down to the combatant commander.
Okay.
On the 5th of January, I resumed my responsibilities, and I fully participated in all of the decisions that led up to subsequent actions.
I believe the American forces were attacked 8 times during your stay in the hospital. Had one of these attacks required a response on January 2nd, who would have made the call on that response?
It would have been, well, the president always makes the call, and it's based upon the input that he gets from
So who would have informed the president?
It would have been the Deputy Secretary of Defense, as she conferred with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the combatant commander.
Okay, on the timeline, when did she know? Did she know on January 2nd that she was in charge?
She knew on January 2nd that we had transferred authority, yes.
When did she found out on January 2nd?
Yes, that information was clearly provided to her staff, and I'm sure she understood that. So.
Okay, now, a lot of times our staff are very loyal, as they should be, and you know, some of the blame has been cast on your staff. Did you ever explicitly direct anyone to keep your condition from the White House on your staff?
As I said earlier, I never directed anyone to keep my hospitalization from the White House.
Okay, did you ever direct your staff or others to keep the status of your condition from the public or any other senior officials?
No.
It's been reported that when you returned to the hospital on January 1st, an aide told the dispatcher, "Can I ask that the ambulance not show up with lights and sirens? We're trying to remain subtle." Did you direct the aide to say that?
What I told my assistant to do was call an ambulance, and that's all that I told him to do.
Has anyone been disciplined for doing something that you did not tell them to do, namely actively suppressing information pertaining to your condition?
Again, as it pointed out in a 30-day review, there was a lot of things that happened, but there was no evidence of an intent to obfuscate or you know, willingly conceal something. And so At the end of the day, as I said earlier, I take full responsibility for this. We didn't get this right. We put the procedures in place to ensure that that this doesn't happen again.
Okay, well, I respect that you take full responsibility. Let me ask you this, Secretary, and I'll finish with this. If a member of the Armed Services fails to report for duty and went missing for 4 days without informing their superior, they would likely face repercussions, isn't that correct?
If, I would point out that I was in a military hospital in the Washington, D.C. area with...
But I'm talking about somebody, one of your subordinates. If they did that, they would face repercussions and perhaps even be dismissed depending on the circumstances, correct? If they didn't report for 4 days.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I'll just finally ask, why shouldn't you face some discipline under these circumstances? You put yourself above the man?
I do not, and I have, as you know, I served 41 years in the military in uniform, and so I understand the challenges, and I understand that, leaders have to set the example. Again, I said that we didn't get the notification right. Again, I was the patient, and so I expect that my organization
Gentleman's time's
would do
expired.
the right
Chair now
things to
recognizes
notify
the
her.
gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna. Mr. Carvajal is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, thank you for being here today. There's no denying the situation regarding your health was not handled perfectly, and you've acknowledged that. That being said, to my knowledge, no laws were broken. There was no lapse in your ability to carry out your duties as Deputy Secretary Hicks was transferred authority in a timely manner. And it does remind me of when Democrats were in charge in October 2020, when then President Trump was telling the American people, downplaying COVID, telling the American people not to take the vaccination, telling the American people not to take certain treatments, but rather maybe Clorox or some things like that. And then lo and behold, he got really ill and was taken to Walter Reed. Democrats didn't have a hearing to talk about how serious it really was that got to take him to Walter Reed and what that meant as commander-in-chief for our country. So I just point that little example, how we didn't have a hearing about that because we felt, as important as it was, there were other systems in place. And while the situation could have been handled better, hindsight is 2020. You have taken accountability, apologized, and worked to make recommendations to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. As far as I am concerned, as a veteran myself, there's nothing else to be said on this matter. I'm satisfied with how you've addressed mistakes made. Since I have a couple more minutes, I'd also think that I'd like to ask a few questions on the issues that are actually pressing. Can you speak to how continuing resolutions affect our national security and readiness?
Sorry, they cause us to lose time and money. And again, we work hard to link our budget requests to the strategy, and without the full appropriation, we can't fully execute our strategy. And so this will cost us probably, if it's a full year continuing resolution, it'll cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of a $25 billion cut overall. And that doesn't allow us in some cases to fund critical programs and resource weapon systems and munitions that are critical to not only Ukraine and to replace the things that we're providing to Ukrainians and the Israelis, but also allow us to build up our stocks for contingencies going forward. So it is a serious thing that I think that hampers our ability to execute our strategy. So.
Thank you. I think every member on this committee is well aware of the threats we are facing globally, from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine to terrorist attacks against our ally Israel. As we start writing this year's NDAA, in your opinion, what do you think should be the committee's top 2 or 3 priorities?
Well, you'll always hear me say that in terms of what we are focused on, China is our pacing challenge, Russia is an acute threat, and you know, we really have to pay attention.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Secretary, I also want to wish you a full and speedy recovery. That being said, I would argue that the protocols that were in place on January the 2nd were adequate. It was a failure of leadership in implementing the controls and protocols that were already in place. I've also served close to 40 years in the military service, and I can tell you that if the CNO would have done this and just disappeared for 3 days, there would be actions and consequences, maybe not to him or her, but to the person who did that. If the Commandant of the Marine Corps did this without reporting upward, there would be consequences. If a private soldier or a sailor or Marine would have done this, or an airman, there would have been consequences. They may not have been discharged from service, but there would have been consequences. You know, and the fallacy of this committee to sit here and say we should be talking about other things. Let me tell you what, when Senator Tuberville did the blockade of the service chiefs and their stars, I heard the administration, I heard the Democrats on this committee say it is dire national security risk if we don't get these people confirmed. However, there was a chain of command at all times, that we knew who the acting commandant was, we knew who the acting CNO was, so there was none. I don't think there was a threat to national security because of this, Secretary Austin. I don't think that there ever was. The places and protocols are in things. I do, however, think it was an extreme lack of leadership at some level, and I hope we identify that and there are consequences, and with that, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Morgan Luttrell.
Thank you, Mr. Gilley. Mr. Secretary, I'm glad that you're feeling better. To my colleagues' points, this is the military. Good order and discipline and good communication is our baseline. It's the profound foundation that we build ourselves off of. And I know through your 40 years in the military, you've obviously had to relieve somebody of command. You've had to remove people from leadership positions. I think is that a fair statement? Yes, sir. And you've mentioned a few times that an individual that would be most in your circumstances that are sick and put into and taken to the hospital. I've had that happen in the commands that I've served in. And what the leadership did at any given level, leadership would remove that individual from that leadership position. Number one, for the well-being, but number two, for the continuity of force, in case you need to be forward deployed, in case communication has to go by, with, and through you, sir. And you say the notifications, the proper individuals were notified. And I understand that. But as I play this out in my head, if the president was to call you, which I'm assuming he called you directly on your phone, and you don't answer, and then he calls somebody in the Pentagon and say, hey, where's the secretary at? And they say he's in the hospital, all right? Then the bubble blows up. They're like, why is he in the hospital? So you see how the spider web could fracture and go in 1,000 different directions. And my concern is that in your position, you're at the highest level, sir, but anywhere underneath you, you would have written these guidelines to take care of this problem set itself. But yet now we sit in this position where the problem lies on your shoulders. So when we talk about responsibility and accountability, this right here is setting a standard, sir, because of how this itself played out. As a lieutenant, if I was caught in this position and my commanding officer relieves me of duty, the first thing I'm going to do is say, no, sir. The Secretary of State went through the exact same position I'm in right now, and I need to stay in my position. And now there's a leverage point that doesn't need to exist in the military at all. And that's just the perspective I have. You can respond to this if you want, but remember, at your level, it is a razor-thin line of communication that cannot be broken. And that happened, sir. It did. And again, you are setting the precedent for everything down inside our vast organization.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, about how many Palestinian women and children have been killed by Israel since October 7th?
It's over 25,000.
Mr. Secretary, last week, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warned that any transfer of weapon or ammunition to Israel violates international law. About how many precision-guided munitions has the United States given Israel since the beginning of the war?
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but we have endeavored
Mr. Zaid, it's about 21,000 precision-guided munitions to Israel since the start of the war. Secretary Austin, last week you spoke to Defense Minister Gallant, and you said clearly there needs to be a plan to ensure the safety and support of those sheltering in Rafah before any military operations proceed. National Security Advisor Sullivan has said he has not seen any plan yet. John Kirby said it would be a disaster to invade Rafah. If Netanyahu defies the United States and invades Rafah, will you commit today that you will halt any future military sales to Israel?
Obviously, sir, that's a presidential decision, but you know, we expect that. And by the way, I spoke to Minister Gallant last night, and I expect that when we provide munitions to allies and partners, that they'll use them in a responsible way.
But would you make a commitment that they defy what we're saying and they violate international law, by the way, which is opposed to National Security Memorandum 18 and National Security Memorandum 20, that if they don't do what we're saying, that we would halt those arms sales or transfers?
Again, the decision to halt the provision of security assistance would not be mine. It would be.
What would you recommend?
Well, I certainly, again, I really do expect that that they utilize the weapons that we provide them in a responsible way, and then if they don't,
I just want to, for time purposes, it seems to me if they're defying what you're telling them, what Kirby's telling them, what Sullivan's telling them, that wouldn't be responsible. Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, has said that the Palestinian children are starving. Extremist settler Stomrich, Israel's finance minister, stopped American flour, which our taxpayers paid for to get into Gaza. If Israel again ever stops American-paid aid from getting into Gaza, will you commit to not sending future arms sales?
Again, that's not my decision. I would, number one, do what I've been doing and engage the leadership and encourage them to ensure that humanitarian assistance is getting.
Mr. Secretary, I would just say, and I have one more question, that we need some consequences when another country is defying you, defying the National Security Advisor, defying the President, defying National Security Memorandum 20. There has to be some consequence. And then I was surprised John Kirby said that Israel is taking more precautions than the U.S. military would to protect civilian life. Mr. Austin, Secretary Austin, isn't that statement inaccurate given Israel has used hundreds of 22,000-pound dumb bombs when there were no place for civilians to go? Would the U.S. government ever target terrorists with 2,000-pound bombs in a densely populated area?
Well, I mean, it depends on the situation, and again.
But have we done that? Use 45% of bombs that are unguided or a 2,000-pound bomb? I mean, do you really think that the Israeli government military is taking more precautions than the United States military would?
I think, just based upon the results in terms of the significant loss of life.
Gentleman's time's expired, Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Gallagher.
And it should be done.
Mr. Secretary, to review, you went in for the initial procedure on December 22nd. Your testimony says the DepSecDef then, quote, assumed the functions and duties of your office and was serving as acting Secretary of Defense, correct?
That's right.
Did you then personally make the decision on December 22nd to transfer authority to the Deputy Secretary of Defense?
I did.
So does 10 U.S.C. 132B, which you cite in your testimony, does it require you to make the decision? Or is there any notification to the President required by statute?
It does not. By law, if I'm unable to perform the duties of the office, then the responsibilities and authorities transition to the Deputy Secretary.
And you can assure us today under oath that you, and you alone, not a military aide, made the decision to execute the TOA to the Deputy Secretary of Defense?
On December 22nd?
Yes.
That's right. And I instructed my assistants to put the process in place.
Thank you. What prevented you at that initial hospitalization, which was a planned procedure, from telling the president, albeit privately, about your condition, that you had cancer?
As I said, you know, a diagnosis of cancer is a very personal and deeply troubling issue, and it's one that, quite frankly, you know, I described it as a gut punch, and again, I didn't want to burden the president with one of my personal issues, but I've also said that I didn't get this right. I should have informed him. I should have, you know, talked to him about it, and I have since talked to the president. I have apologized, and he responded with a warmth and empathy that anybody who knows Joe Biden.
I have limited time. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. You said or you just said you expect your organization in early questioning to do the right thing and notify higher. But when you initially went in, it was not your intent or expectation to notify higher. You didn't expect your organization to notify the president, correct?
You know, as I said, I didn't get that right, and that was not done appropriately.
I appreciate that candor, but just so I have clarity, your initial intent was to go in, have the procedure, for there to be not any complications, and the White House would be none the wiser in the process, correct?
We didn't. I didn't instruct anybody to notify anyone. That's right.
So it is not the fault of your organization or an aide not to notify higher, at least in that initial case.
That's right.
You take full responsibility. You went back to the hospital on January 1st. Your condition worsened, at which point you said earlier the decision was made. The decision was made to transfer authorities again to the DepSec death. Again, did you make that decision to transfer authorities?
I did not. The decision was whether or not they had reached a threshold where I could not communicate or have access to secure communications. And so that triggers the process.
So your condition was severe such that you could not personally action the transfer of authority?
The issue was, number one, they could not get to me, but number two, it was access to secure communications. It had nothing to do with my physical condition at the time.
And yet the decision was made. So who made the decision?
Well, as my assistants conferred, they agreed that we had reached that threshold and they should put the process in place, and they did, and I think it was the right decision.
So your military assistants made the decision to transfer authorities to the Deputy Secretary of Defense?
The military decision, the military aides made the decision to
without any
initiate the process, right?
In the chain of command.
Yeah, I mean, the law says that if I'm unable to...
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming here and for sitting with us. And I wish you good health and a speedy recovery. We had a conversation earlier this week where I expressed my disappointment in some of the decisions that were made by you and by your team, and my personal experience being a young lieutenant in the military and what I would have expected my own self to do in those circumstances. But that's not what we should be talking about today. What we should be talking about is, rather than your health or those decisions that were made around them that are putting us as a nation and us as a world in peril, rather the inactions of Congress right now, and specifically this House right now, and specifically the Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, right now, is putting us and this world in peril. Last evening when I left votes, it was dark and it was raining, and I was intercepted by some people with Ukrainian flags, and one held a sign that said, "It's 1939 again." And it really struck me and literally brought tears to my eyes, because it really genuinely is, and not an exaggeration to say that it's 1939 again. When I was in Lithuania earlier this month with one of the undersecretaries of Ministry of Defense, he also was near tears with his concern about what would happen if Ukraine fell and what would happen to places like Lithuania, Estonia, Moldova, and Europe. When I was recently in the Horn of Africa with a gentleman who had served honorably in our military and was now a contractor with our defense services, he bemoaned, was worried about the fact that he would not allow his now 15-year-old ever to serve in the military for fear that he would die in combat. Because I believe he was thinking that because it is indeed 1939 again. So what are we doing? We are sitting here for hour upon hour of time that the 50 of us and the 435 of us could be spending voting on things like Ukraine and the Ukraine supplement so that we can prevent 1939 from happening again. So my questions to you, real briefly, is whether you could reflect on how our allies are perceiving this from a DoD's perspective, and whether you are concerned whether Russia might continue on in its war in the continent, and whether she is watching.
Our allies are troubled by the message that we're sending in a failure to support Ukraine, and certainly it has impacted the morale of the Ukrainian troops. It is if we continue down this path, it'll be a gift to Putin, and we certainly don't want that to happen. And then as others look at this, they will question whether or not we are a dependable ally or dependable partner, and that's very troubling for us as well.
So I only have a little bit more time, and I don't frankly think I need all of it, because in hours, just mere hours, this House will adjourn yet again, having accomplished literally nothing. We will not have voted for the supplemental. We will not have voted to support you in the DoD through proper appropriations. History will and history should judge us, our inactions. I really don't want to be right. I really don't want this to be 1939 again. I just want to be able to vote on the supplemental and on funding our government. And with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
You didn't tell the president that you had cancer, that you were being treated for cancer, or that the treatment for that cancer had gone wrong, because you saw it as personal and medical. And I think a lot of us have empathy for you in that regard. But now that you see how personal medical decisions are, will you call for the re-recruitment, restoration of full rank and back pay for the 8,600 service members who were vax mandated out of the military?
No, I won't.
So on March 4th, 2021, you authored a memo. It was entitled Message to the Force. And in that memo, you said that there would be clear and swift accountability for anyone who didn't meet the highest standards of the Department of Defense. Now, however this worked out, we all acknowledge that what you did here didn't meet the highest standards, right? You made a mistake.
I admitted to...
Yeah, okay, so we got that. So then the question is, what becomes the clear and swift accountability? Now, you're not going to be discharged, right? No?
That's right.
Okay, you're not going to be suspended. You're not going to be demoted, and you're not going to have your pay cut. None of those things are going to happen to you, right?
That's right.
Okay, so you come here seeking some grace and some forgiveness. And I want you to know that one of the service members who you vax mandated out of the military sent me the parable of the unforgiving debtor. And it's in the book of Matthew, it's verses 21 to 35. The man fell down before his king and begged him, "Please be patient with me, and I will pay all the debt." Then his master, filled with pity for him, released him and forgave him of his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded payment. His fellow servant sat down and begged him for a little more time. "Be patient with me, and I will pay it," he pleaded. But his creditor would not wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. And the king called the man who had been forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Mr. Secretary, you come to us seeking forgiveness, but you offer none. And it seems as though the pattern is repeated. You make a mistake, like on the vax mandate and here regarding your notification, then you get busted. President Biden had to sign something into law reversing your vax mandate. You got busted here, not because you came forward, but because we learned of this through other means. And then after you get busted making a mistake, you want that benefit, but you don't want to extend it to others. This isn't swift or clear. You're not meeting your own standards that you set for yourself. And you say that the DoD is a learning organization. Haven't you learned yet that the military is weaker, not stronger, with the 8,600 people that you vax mandated out of the military?
Just one point, Congressman. The reason I'm here is because the chairman requested that I appear to talk about the circumstances surrounding my hospitalization.
But don't you see the hypocrisy in it? Because you screwed up, we fix your screw up, and now you want grace, but these people who sought religious exemptions, they got no such grace. And also, I just think it's ridiculous that we're in 3 wars, you went AWOL for 3 days, and we get 2 hours with you. If you can't spend more than 2 hours answering these questions, I don't know how you really operate in all these wars.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts who the chair inadvertently skipped. You're recognized, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for sharing your success and your treatment with us, coming from a family that has seen the tolls of cancer take their lives, as well as cancer survivors come through their lives, including prostate cancer. I'll take every opportunity to encourage people to get screening and treatment themselves. Mr. Secretary, I'm the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Europe. And each week I see multiple leaders, foreign ministers, ambassadors, colleagues in Parliament. Not a week goes by where I don't literally see at least 20 of and talk to 20 of these people when we're here. And I want to assure you of one thing. Not one of those leaders asked where you were for 3 days. What they're asking is, where has America been for the last 3 months? Now, I assure them the votes are there to help Ukraine. All that's lacking is for the Speaker of the House to put a simple vote up or down on the floor. Now, Mr. Secretary, you've acknowledged your responsibility. You've held yourself accountable. You've made changes to rectify that. We in this House right now have to be held accountable. If we're to keep democracy alive abroad, we can't have it die right here at home in this House by not taking a basic democratic vote. The greatest threat to our transatlantic democracy since World War II is occurring right now. In World War II, we lost over 400,000 Americans giving their lives, not even mentioning those injured, those sacrificed from home, those whose marriages were broken up, to preserve democracy in the transatlantic sense and usher in the greatest period of peace and prosperity of modern times. Right now, we are just mere stewards compared to their sacrifice, and it's a sacrilege to their memory and a danger to young American men and women who might be deployed, given our Article 5 NATO responsibility in a future war, not to act, and act immediately. In the time I have remaining, there's a lot of misunderstanding about this funding package, the $60 billion to Ukraine. And one of the areas that I don't think most people understand, even other colleagues don't understand, we're in a period of modernization of our own military, which this committee knows, and you know, Mr. Secretary, well. We're phasing out the old assets. We're bringing in the new up-to-date assets that we have to do to compete with China and the other threats we have. Almost half of this money, the $60 billion, that we're giving in this supplemental budget under Ukraine is coming back to replenish our own assets and bring them up to date here at home. It's really serendipitous. We're phasing out things that are useful to them that we're not going to use. We're now going to replenish our own with American manufacturing, with American jobs, for American security. Can you take a few minutes to just comment on that? I don't think people realize that where this money is actually going to end up.
Yeah, Ukraine matters because it's important for our national security first. But you know, you're right, Congressman. The investment, or as we provide resources to Ukraine, we replace those resources with more up-to-date equipment in our own inventory, and that all flows through factories and in various states around this country. So there's billions of dollars that go into expanding our production lines and increasing our capacity. So this benefits us as much
Gentleman's
as it
time's
does.
expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, we wish you continued improvement to your health, but
This hearing today isn't about you. It's not about your privacy. It's not about what you desire. It's not about your health. This is about the chain of command and civilian oversight of the most powerful military in the world that's charged with keeping the American people safe. So I want to be sure that as the American people watch this, we have a couple of things clear. According to your report, it says, given the inability to provide timely communications to the Secretary while in critical care, the Secretary's military assistants agreed that the transfer authorities to the Deputy Secretary was necessary. Mr. Secretary, on January 2nd, at that time, when they made that decision, were you conscious?
I was conscious, yes.
Okay, so you were able to make that decision yourself. You were of sound mind to make that decision yourself.
They did not have access to me to be able to.
So there was then a disconnect for your ability to command the military through secure communications because they couldn't access to you,
and
correct?
it was determined that, and they were advised by the doctors that they wouldn't be able to access or gain access to me, and so that's the tripwire to transfer authorities, and they followed a procedure.
But let's talk about whether there was a break, because you've testified under oath there was no gap. Did the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, know on the 1st of January you were going to the hospital in an ambulance?
He did not.
Did he know on the 2nd of January that you had been admitted to critical care in the ICU?
He did not.
The Commander-in-Chief, elected by the American people, civilian oversight of the military, didn't know on January 1st, didn't know on January 2nd. January 3rd comes around. Did the President know?
He did not.
Yes or no? He did not. How long does it take, I mean, we could go through a number of scenarios. How long does it take a hypersonic missile as a first strike weapon to hit the United States? 15, 30 minutes, max?
Well, you know,
ICBM, I mean, it's commonly out there. ICBM from North Korea, 30 minutes, make a decision.
So we've been clear that the notification was not adequate, but the transfer of authorities.
Right.
When is it?
But the President of the United States, as the Commander-in-Chief, doesn't know for 3 days his Secretary of Defense is incapacitated and in critical care. Correct?
In critical care, not incapacitated.
And the President of the United States doesn't know that his Secretary of Defense can't access secure comms, correct? He doesn't know.
But the deputy is fully empowered and has full access to everything she needs.
Mr. Secretary, who made the decision, just in the time I have remaining, so your report says the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs was informed of the transfer of authority. Who made the decision for that individual to not inform the American people?
I can't answer that. Again,
did he make that decision?
Did I make that decision?
No. Did the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs make the decision?
I can't.
You just had a 30-day review. You don't know who made the decision to not tell the American people?
I know that he was aware on the 2nd. I don't know what decision-making processes that.
To inform the public, you don't know today. You don't know who made the decision to not inform the public.
I'm not sure that there was a decision to not inform the public. I know that he had the information.
Mr. Secretary, in the time I have remaining, the Commandant of the Marine Corps had a medical incident and informed the American people and you. And here's what's missing here. This is not about process. You made this about process. This is about judgment and poor judgment. My teenage daughter knows to tell her supervisor if she's not going to work. The American people, truck drivers, bartenders, know they have to tell their boss or they get fired. But you've held yourself to a different standard, and that's unacceptable, Mr.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Jen Lee from Michigan.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for putting up with the outrage and the drama. I would just say, look, you made a mistake. You admitted it. You're taking steps to address it. And you want to know what accountability is. Accountability is having to come and sit in front of people and their outrage and their drama in public about your health issues and the mistakes you've admitted you've made when the entire world is wondering what the hell is going on with the United States of America. So if we want to talk about what's going on in national security and the greatest threat to national security, it's not that the Secretary of Defense screwed up and is cleaning up the mess. The greatest threat to national security is the polarization of the country and the fact that we can't explain to the world who we are and what kind of leadership role we want. So in that context, the whole world is trying to figure out what we're going to do next. Are we going to fund Ukraine to make sure that for the first time since World War II, we don't have an autocratic nation take over a democracy? First time. Are we going to send a signal to the Chinese and the Chinese government that we still want a leadership role in the in the world, and we're willing to back that up with strength, with force, and with action? We have got our soldiers being shot at in the Middle East by the Iranians. We've got a lot going on. And I would hazard a guess that the people who are most stridently dramatic about this issue are the very ones who have said publicly that they don't intend to support protecting Ukraine against Putin. They don't care about what's going on in Taiwan. They don't want that strong role in the world. They want to distract us with this and everything else that they're yelling about, because they are ceding our leadership role in the world. And U.S. leadership is far from perfect, but I would take U.S. leadership over Chinese leadership or Russian leadership any single day. So watch the outrage, and you can correlate that to how much they don't want to talk about their sucking up to their whoever, political masters, and denying the United States of America its leadership role that it has held since World War II. We are also sitting here, a budget for the whole government, not just the Pentagon. We're living on these now 1 week extensions, 2 months extensions, going on and on. If we're worried about competing in the 21st century on national security, if we're worried about drone attacks, using a $1,000 drone to hit our forces in places like the Middle East, we need to do things to adapt and fight. By not passing a budget for next year, the Pentagon is unable to do anything new. They're unable to start anything new. They're just holding on week by week, month by month, while we screw up our national security because we can't get our own house in order. This committee has always been a real calm in the storm when it comes to bipartisanship. So I would ask that when we come back together in a month and have a hearing with the Secretary, we focus it on the things that are actually important to national security, instead of denying this man the apology that he's made, the mea culpa that he's made, and get on to the business of the American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. I would make the point that the chairman decided to call this hearing, and there is no stronger proponent of Ukraine funding than the chairman. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I just want to clear up a couple things that I think is really important, because we talked a lot about changes to the process. You spoke earlier, you're going to make 8 changes to the process. I think that's part of the problem, is we spend all this time putting together processes, but unless we're willing to follow them, the processes are really irrelevant. So I guess my first question is, you admitted that it wasn't really the process that was the problem, it was you, correct?
I did not admit that.
Oh, okay, then I misheard, I apologize. So what error did you make, if any?
Well, first of all, I said that I didn't inform the president initially of my cancer diagnosis, and that was a mistake. In terms of the hospitalization, January 1st throughout, again, I was the patient. And so my expectation is that the organization inform the right agencies. That,
okay, so maybe I didn't understood it. So as long as you inform somebody other than your boss to let the boss know, that is acceptable.
Certainly informing the chief of staff, the White House, the National Security Advisor, I think they would immediately inform the president.
So yes, so it really wasn't your fault, it was the staff's fault. So you informed the staff the staff made an error not to inform the president? I'm just trying to connect the dots.
No.
No, okay.
The president, my chief of staff informed the National Security Advisor on the 4th of January, and then that notification followed through to the president.
So in your opinion, you didn't make an error? It was the process that was the issue?
We didn't get this right. Again,
okay. I'm just trying to find where the blame lays.
Critical care at from the 2nd to the 4th.
Okay, so it wasn't your fault. It was the staff's fault.
Well, I didn't have access to any kind of communications during that time.
You didn't have a phone, nothing?
No.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe we should reform the processes at the hospital to allow phones in there. But, okay, my question is, because it doesn't seem like we're taking a lot of accountability, which I thought I heard at the beginning, so my apologies to the American people for that. When you were a commander, would you accept the same behavior from your subordinates as you did? So let me play it out to this. You had an enlisted man, a soldier, person. They went in for treatment, and they didn't tell you, the commander. They told their, friend. That's cool, right? That's good. We can follow. That's good. You'd accept that. And there'd be no punishment. There'd be no ramifications from that person, correct?
Well, I don't know which part you're referring to.
I'm making a scenario. Your boss is the President of the United States. No different than an enlisted person. If you're the commander, you're in charge, you're that person, you're the enlisted person's boss. If the enlisted soldier did the exact same thing as you did, you'd accept, well, it's really not the enlisted person's fault. It's really their staff's fault. And really, it's not even their staff's fault, it's really the process fault. No, I think that there would be some level of ramification, consequence, or punishment. I'm seeming to not be able to connect those dots with you. It's just different.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for appearing today. And I wish you continued health in your speedy recovery. I have spent the last several weeks meeting with allies, partners, and stakeholders related to the current conflicts and struggles around the world. I met with President Zelensky and our European partners to discuss Russia's war of choice in Ukraine. I met with leadership in Egypt, Jordan, and Israel to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. I've also met with the Jewish, Palestinian, and Ukrainian communities in my own district to hear about their concerns. And finally, as a member of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, I know all too well the challenges our nation faces in competition in the Indo-Pacific region. And despite these and other challenges the Department of Defense faces across the world, this legislative body has still not passed the appropriations needed to plan, to prepare, and to act in our nation's best interest. And while the Biden administration has a plan for the National Security Supplemental that was prepared months ago, I remain concerned that there is still no plan from the Speaker and from the GOP majority to pass the desperately needed supplemental. And I share the real frustration and anger you're hearing today from my Democratic colleagues that as we face conflicts across the world, and as we on the House Armed Services Committee hold this hearing, my Republican friends on House, who I would expect to be the strongest allies in this fight to get the supplemental on the floor, are not addressing these huge issues. So I'll ask you, Mr. Secretary, as we near yet another potential government shutdown, we've sort of kicked the can down the road now for a couple more weeks and hopefully can figure this out. But as we keep limping along with CR after CR after CR, and as we approach the fiscal year now 2025 appropriation cycle, even though we haven't passed the 24, as you know, we are now getting into hearings for the National Defense Authorization Act for 25. Every member of this committee continues to hear from senior DoD leaders about how damaging CRs are for our national defense. Can you speak in a little more detail about the practical impact that our broken appropriations process has on the implementation of our national defense security strategy?
Again, you've heard me say a number of times that you lose both time and money. And if we go for a full year with the CR, that'll be, we'll lose about $25 billion in discretionary funds there. So this is a big deal because we go through a lot of effort to link our budget requests to our strategy. I think we've done a very good job of that, and of course, without a budget, we can't execute the strategy in its fullest, and so that's a concern. And again, as you look at the challenges around the world, our ability to do the right things to make sure that we maintain the edge in the Indo-Pacific, to help Ukraine counter Russia's aggression, and to do the things in the Middle East that we're doing to support Israel and to try to work to prevent the spread of a larger conflict. And again, we are supporting and doing a lot of things around the globe in support of our strategy, and without the funding, this doesn't. It hampers us. It hamstrings us. So.
Time's expired. I would point out, consistent with our agreed upon time of ending this hearing, we will have time for 3 more questioners, Mr. Fallon, Ms. Escobar, and Ms. Mace. And at that point, we will adjourn. I'd ask all of the members to submit their questions for the record, and I would ask the Secretary to respond to those in a timely fashion. And with that, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to take you back to spring of 2021. It was in April of that year that you and other military senior leaders were discussing a drawdown in the war with Afghanistan with President Biden. He didn't take your advice, but like a good political appointee, you publicly remained supportive of his decision. Would you describe the withdrawal from Afghanistan as closer to a success or closer to a failure?
I would say that I'm proud of the work that our troops did in a very challenging situation, and proud of the support that we provided to Afghans who wanted to exit the country, and we were not able to support all the folks that we wanted to support, but that effort continues as we speak today.
So let me ask you that question again because it didn't get answered. Would you describe it closer to a success or a failure?
I think, again, it was a very challenging situation. I think we were successful in getting in retrograding our people and our equipment under very challenging in a very challenging situation, and we're able to help a number of Afghans as well.
In the 18 months prior to this administration coming to office in January of 2021, how many American lives did we lose in Afghanistan?
I'm sorry?
Prior to Joe Biden becoming president, in the prior 18 months, how many Americans did we lose in Afghanistan? How many military service members?
Very few. I'd have to go back and check the record.
I think it's exactly 0. And then we lost 13 lives under this administration's watch. 5,000 prisoners broke out of Bagram. We left billions of dollars worth of equipment. The Afghan army disintegrated within 2 weeks. And General McKenzie, General Milley, and I believe yourself as well, when we had a discussion in 2021, could not guarantee me or the American people that any of those 5,000 scumbags that did escape from Bagram weren't involved in the murder of the 13 service members that occurred under your watch. And why didn't we maybe have a withdrawal when it wasn't prime fighting season? I mean, all these questions, this, I think, in large measure could have been avoided. And then just a little walk through history here in the last couple of administrations. Vladimir Putin, a lot of my colleagues have talked about Ukraine. In 2008, Vladimir Putin stole a province from Georgia, and it was under George W. Bush's watch. And then 2014, he stole all of Crimea under Barack Obama's watch. And then a Russian-supported insurgency in eastern Ukraine kicked off as well. And then, Mr. Secretary, President of the United States from 2017 to 2021 was? Do you are aware who that was?
2013.
17 to 21. Who was the President of the United States?
Of course, it was President Trump.
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Did Vladimir Putin embark on any new foreign adventures in those 4 years?
He didn't. But
thank you. And then February 2022, what happened?
You know, he certainly, I mean, that's when he attacked Ukraine and
Full-scale invasion, almost 200,000 regular
Absolutely,
Russian
yeah.
troops. So I think that if we were more concerned with our military projecting power and not worried about personal pronouns, it would be better for the American people and, quite frankly, the free world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the ranking member for a few statements.
I'll be quick with this, but there was a peace treaty negotiated by Donald Trump with the Taliban that had a ceasefire in place. Shame Mr. Fallon is leaving because this could be educational. On May 1st, well, sometimes you can learn from listening too. I know it's a shocking concept. That peace treaty expired in May of 2021. The reason there were no casualties is because President Trump had promised the Taliban that we would leave, and therefore there was a ceasefire. Come May of 2021, if we were not gone, that ceasefire would have expired. So the rewriting of the history of Afghanistan in this committee is deeply troubling to me. Now, what would have happened in May if we were still there? I don't think the Taliban would have honored that ceasefire. And I don't think we would have had that zero casualty list for too much longer. So let's understand exactly what happened in Afghanistan instead of rewriting history. I thank the chairman for giving me that indulgence, and I yield back.
Certainly. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the ranking member also for that very important recent history lesson. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for being here today, and please know that we all wish you nothing but the best as you continue on your journey toward absolute maximum best health possible. I also want to thank you for the acknowledgement of in retrospect, what could have been done better, and for the 30-day assessment. I'd like to give you the opportunity to assure the American people who are watching what lessons were learned in that 30-day review, and looking forward, what can and will be done better.
Well, the importance of prompt notification of key leaders, of senior leader being ill or being hospitalized, and the importance of everyone in the chain, in the environment, understanding of the policies and procedures, and are able to put those into play right away. And we put measures in place that ensure that first of all, people are aware of the policies and procedures, and they execute them. We had an opportunity to put this in play on February 11th when I went back to the hospital, and prompt notification was made, transfer of authorities was made promptly, and again, I reassumed my responsibilities on February 13th. So we'd already put things into place by February 11th before the 30-day review came out. And then when the 30-day review made recommendations, 8 recommendations to me, we're going to take those recommendations on. We've already executed 2 of them, and the other 6 we're promptly pursuing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I think it's always so important for us to exercise judicious oversight and make sure that we learn lessons and do better going forward. And I really appreciate that succinct description of the lessons learned and the assurances to the American people. Like many of my colleagues, I had the incredible privilege of attending and participating in the Munich Security Conference recently, and was in the meeting with President Zelensky as we discussed the situation in Ukraine and the fact that this body has not done its job in ensuring that we vote on and pass the supplemental request by the president. I'd like for you, just in this last minute, so that the American people understand why this is so important for us to provide support to Ukraine. 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, if Ukraine falls to Putin, what is in that future for all of us?
Well, thank you, and thank you for your support of the supplemental If Ukraine falls, again, Putin won't stop there. He will just continue to move forward and attack and take on the sovereign territory of his neighbors. And so, if you're a Baltic state, you're really worried about whether or not you're next. And so they know Putin. They know that what he's capable of. And quite frankly, if Ukraine falls, I really believe that NATO will be in a fight with Russia.
Gentlelady's time expired. Chair, now recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Austin, for being with us today. Cancer is a serious illness, and we wish you the best in your recovery. I've been disappointed today in some of the responses. I do want to ask a question is, when did you first receive your diagnosis?
It was early December.
And then who did you tell? Did you tell your staff when you received the diagnosis?
I didn't. Again, as I said earlier.
Did you tell your staff you received the diagnosis, yes or no?
No, I did not.
Okay. When did you learn that you needed surgery?
Well, as soon as that diagnosis was made, you have.
Okay, and then when did you tell your staff you needed surgery? When you found out you needed surgery, did you then inform your staff that you needed surgery?
I didn't tell my staff that I needed surgery.
When did you schedule the surgery?
It was mid-December.
Okay, and that was the December 22nd surgery?
Yes.
When you scheduled the surgery, did you tell your staff you had a surgery scheduled?
I did not.
When you go under surgery for prostate cancer, do you need to be like totally knocked out, right? You can't be awake for the surgery. You have to be totally unconscious
right,
and incapacitated, right? Yes or no?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. And then the date of the first surgery was December 22nd. At what point did you tell your staff you were going under the knife and going to be unconscious and incapacitated?
Again,
Did you tell your staff that you were in the hospital and going to be under the knife?
I have admitted that that I didn't get this right. I should have notified the president of my my cancer diagnosis and my.
So you didn't inform your staff in December when you had the December surgery that you were going to be incapacitated at all?
I knew I was going to be incapacitated, and I transferred authorities to the deputy secretary.
And then they had this emergency event. Well, that was January 1.
That's correct.
What time of day did that happen?
Late afternoon.
And then did you tell your staff late afternoon when it happened what was happening?
I didn't. My concern there was getting to the hospital.
You did not tell your staff that you were on the way to the hospital?
That's right.
Okay. When did your staff find out you were at the hospital?
I don't know when.
You don't know when you told your staff that you were at the hospital? Are you kidding me?
Again, as a patient in the hospital undergoing evaluation.
Okay, let me just back up. I have a minute and a half. If any American worker did what you did, they would be fired. And they aren't the number 2 in the chain of command of the greatest and most lethal fighting force in the world. And here you are, you're not informing anybody on your staff that this is happening, let alone the President of the United States, let alone the delay to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, let alone the delay to the Deputy Secretary. What happens? Now, I didn't serve, most of my family has served. So can you please tell me in just a few seconds, when a soldier goes AWOL, when they wear the uniform, when they put their lives on the line for our nation, for you, what happens when they go AWOL? What is the punishment?
Well, I wouldn't equate my going to the hospital and receiving treatment
being
as going
incapacitated as a secretary here, yes, is going AWOL. So you don't equate disappearing, being incapacitated with being AWOL.
I didn't disappear. I was in a military medical facility in Washington, D.C.
You just testified you didn't tell your staff. Did you not? You just testified. What happens when a soldier goes AWOL? I have 20 seconds. What happens when a soldier goes AWOL?
We have to realize that, I have a fairly large.
Are they honorably or dishonorably discharged? Are they put into the brig? Are they? What happens? Seriously, you're not even answering the questions. I'm not going to rest until someone. We should not rest until someone is held accountable. I am deeply disappointed in your response today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time expired. Chair now recognizes ranking member for any closing comments he may have.
I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary for making himself available. I would remind members that didn't get to questions to submit them for the record, and I ask the Secretary to respond to them in a timely fashion. With that, we are adjourned.